It has been a hell of a week, and I have spent the last few days thinking a lot about what just happened, and I'm sure you have too. I'm trying not to completely wallow in it, though if you're doing a little wallowing, I get it, I've been there too. I'm mostly trying to learn from it and think about what comes next. Because right now is a time to reflect. It's definitely a time to be humble, but it's also a time to be very, very curious. Look, I know there is an instinct right now to try and find some very clear-cut explanation to make sense of what just happened. But the thing is, there isn't just one. And there's one thing I know, it's that there were lots and lots of factors at play here. Yes, there have been some major trends wiping out incumbents all across the world post-COVID. Yes, there is a lot of sexism and racism in our country, something that definitely exists and something that can be frustratingly hard to measure. And yes, Kamala Harris ran a campaign in just 107 days. During those 107 days, she had some moments of complete brilliance. The debate and the Democratic convention both definitely come to mind. And many of us, perhaps because of those moments, thought she might be able to overcome the burden of an unpopular governing party, introduce herself to voters, bring back the members of the Democratic coalition who had left and massively outperform every single global trend. And maybe that expectation was insurmountable all along, especially on such a short timeline. But beyond those structural challenges, we also need to be pretty clear-eyed right now about some hard truths in the results from Tuesday night. I mean, Donald Trump improved to share the vote with almost every demographic group. It's a fact. He improved with men and women and with young people and with Latinos. If that's not a hard truth, I really don't know what is. And while we try to understand why that happened, I think there might be, and I've seen this out there, so I know there is, an instinct to assign blame to this demographic group or that demographic group, white women, Latino men, whatever it may be. But despite how hard this moment is and how challenging the years ahead will be, we have to resist that urge, as hard as it is, because that's just not how democracy works. Because winning elections is about convincing more voters that you are the right choice. No one American and no one group of Americans owes anyone their vote. People choose with their own free will who they think better represents their interests. It doesn't always make sense all the time. People are either motivated to turn out to support what a party is offering, or they aren't. And we need to reflect on that. We need to reflect on why an anti-labor, anti-working class candidate won voters who didn't go to college. Why an anti-immigrant candidate who ran on the promise of deporting millions of people made historic gains with Latino voters. And why a country who ranks democracy as one of its top issues, including in the exit polls, elected the guy who promised to be a dictator on day one and was, in fact, split about who was the bigger threat to democracy. Those are all big questions. Man, are they big questions. And it might be a while before we have answers to all of them. We have to accept that, too. Now, there were also some bright spots, including the election of two black women to the Senate, of Alyssa Slotkin and re-election of Tammy Baldwin and Jackie Rosen to the Senate. Ruben Gallego is leading in his race, too. Those races all happened, especially the last ones I mentioned, in states where Trump won. And those candidates all outperformed the top of the ticket. Maybe there are some lessons there. But what I do know for sure is that not nearly enough people turned out to vote for what the Democratic Party was selling nationally. It wasn't just people going to Trump's way. Millions of people didn't turn out. And I look at this, as I've been reflecting over the past couple of days, from my vantage point as a college-educated white person, which is one of the only demographics, by the way, that Donald Trump didn't increase his share of the vote with. And I can tell you that the message of the party is geared far too much toward me. And far too many of the people who were lifted up in the final days were people who were meant to appeal to me. Look, I happen to believe that Donald Trump is a major threat to our democracy. I believe that as much today as I did this time last week. Fascism is a threat, a dire one. So is authoritarian leadership. I believe that in my bones, and I believe it's what we're facing. But clearly that message didn't connect with enough people. And maybe it was the wrong closing message to choose with the wrong people. Too many people either didn't buy it and didn't show up, or were willing to price in the risks because other issues were more important to them. And the answer to that failure isn't to say fascism doesn't matter. It does. Or to say everyone who didn't vote for Harris is to blame for not hearing or understanding the threat. It's for candidates to rethink how they prioritize what they talk about moving forward. It's to rethink how they engage moving forward. Do that Joe Rogan podcast, by the way. Part of the answer is to stop diagnosing and to start listening. And this week I thought a lot about the first presidential campaign I did in 2004. It's not exactly the same at all, but there are some lessons here. For one, it produced an outcome that also made very little sense at the time. It did not make any sense that the country chose a man who had started a deeply unpopular war in Iraq over a decorated Vietnam War veteran who had spoken out against it. But they did. And it left the Democratic Party with a huge leadership vacuum at the time. Turns out, vacuums can be a good thing sometimes. I mean, 2 years later, the country rejected George W. Bush's failed presidency, which it was, and Democrats won back the House for the first time in 12 years, making Nancy Pelosi the first female Speaker of the House. 2 years after that, the Democratic electorate, after a hard-fought primary with very good candidates, chose a black man with the middle name Hussein over the party establishment candidate as their nominee. And the country chose that same man, Barack Obama, to be their president twice. I traveled with him to nearly every event he did on both presidential campaigns. And I can tell you that he won by throwing out the playbook and showing up for years to places people didn't expect. Even when he was running for Senate, he was all over Southern Illinois. He won by being fearless. He refused to accept the notion that the country would only elect someone who looked or sounded a certain way. He did it by believing that, yes, we can as a country. And yes, the man is a once-in-a-generation speaker. And yes, the coalition would be different today, and the politics are very different. But my point is this. He didn't win by talking at people. He won by listening. He won by listening to the country and charting a new path fearlessly forward based on what he heard. So I know you're feeling confused, upset, pissed off. You want clear answers. And I am sure you're feeling exhausted. I totally get it. But as painful as it is right now, even in the midst of that exhaustion and anger that you're feeling, again, understandable, it's important that we don't fall into the trap of believing that things can't get better, that we can't get to the other side of this, because they can get better, and we can. So let's listen carefully, let's be curious, let's learn a lot, and let's get back to work. And I have two people joining me to start with who are doing exactly that. Mallory McMorrow is a state senator from Michigan. When Trump won in 2016, she ran for office in Michigan and won. Justin Jones is a state representative from Tennessee, and he has always been fearless about speaking out for what he believes in a very red state. They're two of the most inspiring and authentic young Democrats I know, and they were exactly who I wanted to talk to today as I'm trying to make sense of this. So, Mallory, let me start with you, because I just kind of laid out some of my thinking about this moment. First of all, I welcome anything you disagree with. But I've also been watching a lot of the videos you've been doing online, which are so good. You've been answering so many questions that people have been sending, hard ones. You've been so raw and authentic in it. I just wanted to ask you kind of a question from me. And what are you saying to people who might feel disoriented and discouraged right now, who are asking you as somebody who represents them or just asking you online?
So first of all, I think just acknowledging that people have every right to be angry and pissed off and don't want to hear, don't worry, it's going to be okay, because that takes the ownership off of us. And really, we don't know if it's going to be okay. But the thing about this country that's so beautiful is we get to decide. And I have been so moved. You know, I started doing this Q&A on my Instagram just before the election to ask if people had questions about voting. And then post-election, I just posted, ask me anything. And there are tens of thousands of people watching these videos, sharing them. I'm sitting on more than 200 questions of people who are ready to get to work and just want to know how. And amidst all of it, that gives me a lot of hope.
That is a lot of hope that it offers. Justin, maybe he can be a guest. Maybe he can be a guest answerer at times if you need. So, Justin, let me turn to you, because you're one of the people when I don't know how to make sense of a moment, I think of what might be going on in your head and how you're making sense of it. How are you making sense of this moment, and what are you telling people who feel frustrated and angry and like they just want to give up and turn off the news and not get engaged with politics anymore?
Definitely. First of all, Jen, I just want to say thank you for, I think it shows by having two state lawmakers the type of conversations that we need to be having right now, these bottom-up conversations of how do we build back this party and connect it to the people on the grassroots. So the thing I've been telling people, number one, is that we did not lose our power on election night. That our power, I live in a state that has been under MAGA control for the past few years in a super minority, and every day we continue to fight because we know that the South is worth fighting for and this nation is worth fighting for. And so one thing I would say is that right now, Democrats don't need to be a pity party. We need to be a populist party, a party that uplifts our, the things that people want to see delivered on. Things like, free lunch and free breakfast for kids in schools. Things like protecting our environment and clean air and clean water. Things like fighting for college affordability. We need to be a bold party and show what it means to be fighters in this time. People want us not to be a party that just wants to maintain things as they are, but who has a prophetic and bold vision of what this nation can be, what it ought to be, what it should be. And it's time for us to be bold and to offer moral clarity. Election night should not bring us into despair or denial. It should bring us into deeper solidarity, into deeper moral clarity as to what the vision we want this nation to be, and give people something to fight for and not just fight against. I think that's what we have to offer people in this time.
That's such a powerful, powerful message. I've been thinking about this so much over the last couple of days. So let me turn that back to you, Mallory, because there is a disconnect here. I think Justin talked about it. You're in a state in Michigan where Alyssa Slotkin was just elected to the Senate, which, as I said, is a very bright point. It was lost at the presidential level. How some things we're not resonating. So how, in your view, does the party go from here in terms of that national message, that message that Justin's talking about, connecting with the millions of people who didn't show up across the country?
So look, I have said for years, we as Democrats have to talk to people like you would talk to your friend at a bar. Nobody wants to be lectured at. I have gotten a lot of comments, frankly, from Trump supporters on a lot of my videos, and sifting through all the ugliness, there's a message from a lot of people. One said, hey, we don't hate you, but we're going to have lower prices and we're not going to have wars. And that is a question for me of why? Why is that the takeaway that they took from this man, that you were willing to overlook everything else and take that vote? And what can we do to meet people where they are? I think that's something that's also a good reminder is 2016 gave us 2018. And here in Michigan, that gave us Gretchen Whitmer and Alyssa Slotkin and me. There were a lot of people. And me, right. We all got together and said, we can make this better. We have to meet people where they are. And Gretchen won on a message of fix the damn roads. That's pretty straightforward that people can understand.